Good afternoon and welcome to this webcast. We're just going to, I see a number of people starting to join, so we'll just hold on for a couple of minutes while allow people to connect. Okay, I see we've got a few numbers there, so I suggest let's get started. We might have a few more joiners as we progress and what have you. And I see a number of names there in the box there, some familiar friends and some new, but let's move on anyway. Okay, so welcome to this webcast. It's Friday, the sun's out, and it's due to be even better tomorrow. So yeah, welcome, and I hope we find this a useful hour for us just now. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Steve Parr. I actually recently joined DM Integration. After many years in industry, I was working mostly at Mondelez, which some of you would know, therefore, came from Kraft and from Cadbury as the companies joined and what have you. And I see at least one name from there in the list, what have you. As we use the hour, and we're going to go through a number of notes around implementing IBP in a large organization. What we want to do is run through that from a presentation point of view, and then try to save time at the end then for any questions. You will note on your screen there's a chat box if you want to talk to each other or to all of us, that'd be great. But also the ability to ask questions as well as we go on and what have you. Okay, so let's get started then. So here at DMI, we like to talk around integrated business excellence, and we have this full model here to describe it, where really, as you can see, what we're trying to do is to link the vision and the strategic plans of the business through down into the IBP process and the execution. There's clearly three main pillars to this, as in all IBP processes: how we manage the portfolio and the portfolio management, how we manage demand and bring that together, and how we manage the supply chain and the ability to supply. All of these, though, are underpinned, if you like, by a number of features that go across the board. In particular, that whole agenda on continuous improvement, on people development, on the balanced scorecards, and the quality of data, which I think is vital to make this successful. So not wanting to dive too deep into that, but wanting to use it as a reference point. At DMI, we really talk around IBP as being a six-step process. Traditionally and widely, we tend to talk about a five-step. We'll talk around a portfolio process, then moving on into a demand review, where we turn around and say, so If we'd known from the portfolio what products we want to sell in the demand review, we're now really going to establish how much we're going to sell. And then the supplier review enables us to complete that balance and understand what's left, and make sure that we can answer yes to the demands from the demand review. In the DMI model, what we found is that whenever we talk about this, we talk about where do people fit, then the answer is, well, everywhere. Well, and that's a little bit too simple, too easy, and doesn't really come across strong enough. So very much the new bit here to what you might have seen previously is to have a whole track, to have a whole review, very much focused on the people and the people development to support the process. All of those come together, as we see in many industries, where we bring it together so that we can understand the financial impact of that plan, how it integrates, and look at scenarios there and what ifs to build in, what have you. As always with these things, major projects in the business do tend to consume time, energy, resource. So we've always bring those in together, which takes us down into that leadership team review so that we can bring it all as a complete process. The outputs of that process obviously feed back to the beginning of the next cycle, and so we continue again. This should be a very familiar model for you. This is our view of how we define integrated business planning. What I want to do today really is to talk about how we would change and adapt that model when we start talking about larger organizations. Because as we move into larger organizations, then things start to change and things start to be a little bit different. Why? Because the decision rights across the organization don't fall into those nice, simple 5 or 6 buckets where each bucket has everybody there together. We might have multiple business entities all operating under the one company. We might have multiple markets. And clearly, multiple markets means multiple sales teams, multiple commercial agendas. How do we bring all these together and what have you? So essentially, when we start talking about a global or a very large organization, then we actually need to think carefully about how we're going to take that 5 or 6 step model that we educate and that we show to the organization to explain the process. And we need to start dividing and slicing it differently so that we can apply it and reflect the decision rights of the organization in a way that's useful to us. A simple example of this would be what's on your screen now. Now here, let's say I've got 3 regions, let's, for sake of argument, say the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and I've got a global process at the top of the page. In this simple example, then what we're actually doing is running the IBP process at each of those 3 regions. And in each of those 3 regions, each step of the process is having a roll up into the global process. Now, this has lots of advantages for us in simplicity and in maintaining the local ownership, maybe. But clearly, as a global one, this is that global process is much more on the informed basis with this simple roll up. But this is, depending on the organization, obviously one of those choices that's there for us. A more complicated model, which I want to talk through, starts to reflect the local, the market dynamics, the regional, and up to a global process. So here is a representation from a real company a number of years ago of that monthly IBP process. It started off being a global business, very much what is our global brands and the portfolio there. So you very much had a global portfolio process and a global portfolio review. That then fed the regional portfolio process. And in this environment here, there was not a portfolio management below region. So that regional PMR, that regional portfolio review, was able to feed in then to the individual market demand reviews. These are the products, this is the point at which they'll come to market for you or are available for you. How do you want to execute that in your markets? What is the demand plan that each market would have? And we see that as we've got multiple boxes there. They're all concurrent, all happening within the same day or within a limited amount of time, such that it can all consolidate back up to a regional demand review. Because obviously the regional leadership team will want to be able to give their blessing and be clear about what their commitments are. And then by the end of week 2, we get to a point where we can establish a global demand review. So we're going to be sourcing products within region, across region. But clearly for us here, by the end of week 2, we're saying we've now got a clear view of the demand review for the next however long, probably going to be 2, maybe 3 years. And clearly the execution window at the front, the first 2, probably 3 months, is very tactical, very executional. And here we are talking about month 4 onwards. Based on that global demand review, as we move into week 3, we've now got all the information to do the individual supply point reviews, to look at the capacities and the supply capability of our plants and even our suppliers. We do not have to be a manufacturing business in order for this process to apply. It could well be that everything that we are selling is bought in, is made by an external body. That does not take away the need to think about the supply capability. So we'll run through that process. We'll analyze, we'll review, we'll look at alternatives there for each of the supply points. Obviously focusing on the critical ones and the ones where we know we have issues. Some will be no constraints at all at times, which allows us by the end of week 3 to have had and established our global supply review. We've looked at the global footprint, we've taken all the demands from all the regions, we know where we need to supply to, and we can close that part of the process. Moving into week 4, we had the people review. So, where are we on our people capabilities? What do we need to do there? It allowed us to bring everything then in together in the financial plan, bringing it in on, in effect, that rough cut P&L for the business, projected forward over the time, over the horizon of the plan, such that we could have the leadership team review, the management business review, depends on your language. And in this model here from a few years ago, this was then happening at both a regional level and a global level. So quite a comprehensive example of one of the ones we could do. And we can see here at the point I was trying to make around the decision rights and how they move as to whether the decision rights are local, for instance, in the sales commercial agenda, or whether they're regional or possibly global, as on the supply ones, an example. Okay. Another example I had, and this may look familiar to some, was then a simplification of that, trying to emphasize this time for this company was the focus on the 5-step process, but try to identify again that global input enables a regional portfolio review, very much a regional process with a global roll-up and what have you. So this gives us a slightly different slant because we're not running the whole process globally. In this example here, then we're trying to bring the summary together globally, but all the main planning, the majority of the portfolio, certainly the demand and the supply, is all very, very regional. So what I've tried to take from these 3 examples is really the point that I get across is actually it depends for your organization where the decision rights are, how the organization is divided, is broken up, it's split out, what have you. And therefore, a key part of the design process has to be an understanding of the organization and actually working out which type of this model we want to work to. So what I wanted to do before we get into the details of some of the learnings is just to pick up on what makes success. I have two slides here. I'm actually going to use the first one and talk to this one. The second we'll just page through. Clearly, the leadership commitment is absolutely fundamental for success here. If we don't have that commitment, if from a leadership level we are driving in a different direction to the process and taking focus away from the process and decisions outside of the process, then the process will fail. It is really important to commit the right resources, full-time, and ideally the best resources, the people that can put their arms around it and understand what's happening and really influence the organization. One of the interesting bits I find is then on the education. I think the challenge that we always have with IBP and S&OP is actually if you break it down to all the component parts, it's things we all do already. So the challenge we always have on the education front is understanding how it all fits together in order to be successful. Understanding the consequence. If I do this in this process, it's going to have this impact over here. So actually having the whole team together, fully engaged, fully educated as to why we're going to do this process and how it helps them and helps the wider organization, really is so important to successful implementation here. The lead here really for this session, I think, and in many ways the angle in for this point about large organizations though is being really clear about the design, how this will work in my company, how this will work within the relationships between individual markets or divisions and the head office or the global views or etc. I think that's really, really important. I think because the design has to work for the organization such that the organization can still operate and still manage itself. Much easier to do when everybody's in one building, much more difficult to do when we're spread around. And then lastly, this whole need to embed, to coach, to let it evolve. I think that if we waited before we started until everything was perfect, we'd never start. It is very much a case of we'll always start at a level and we'll always need to be continuously looking for how we improve, looking to how we evolve, and trying to make it better and better. So these are just some 5 thoughts there. What I want to do is actually break it down a little bit more, but I think you'll see those ones coming through again and time and time. So this was my second page I'm missing. Here at DM Integration, we have, as you would expect, very much a proven path. This is how to implement IBP in a successful way. I'm sure you'll have seen similar models in the past as well, and that's fine. This is how we see it. What I want to do is I'm not going to talk too much to this whole page at the moment. We'll certainly come back to it at the end. What I want to do is going to take it slice by slice and start talking through some of those bits, particularly with learnings as the complexities then of trying to work together in a larger implementation. So firstly, the engage and inspire. Here we are, we're engaging the leadership, we're making sure we understand what the value opportunity is. We're going through and setting up the implementation team, the design teams, and we're going to make sure, in order for them to be able to do that design, then clearly we need to educate them, give them the information, give them the tools to be able to design this whole process and get them inspired. At the bottom there, clearly, yeah, there's one of my points on the right. Much as people will tell you can do this with Excel, honestly, you cannot. Or you can with a massive amount of effort. And as you start looking at a large organization, that effort just becomes too much. So, lessons learned, and trying to sort of share some thoughts on this one with you. Beware leaders that don't engage because they already get it. So one of the biggest challenges I've seen time and time again is we'll have the leadership team there or a member that sort of turn around and say, we're fully committed to doing this. My team are all here, but don't worry about me. I really get this. I'm really supportive. Now, that's great. It's great that they're committed. It's great that they've got the team there. But often they don't quite get it as well as they thought they did. Or their team don't see that same commitment from them. So it's like, well, okay, if you're not really engaged, how committed are you? So making sure that they really are engaged, making sure that they really understand the consequences. I've seen examples where it say, this is what the process is going to be. Yeah, I've signed up for it. Count me in. It was great. Without them actually knowing and understanding that by signing up to the program, they're actually signing up to a whole range of behaviors and process consequences that they haven't appreciated. So make sure they get it. A phrase I'd loved is implementing IBP is easy when the business is going well. How true? What does that really mean? Does that mean that it's hard when the business is not going well? Well, actually, I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because ultimately what this is really saying is, if the business is going well, I've got lots of time to engage and I can work with this. When it's going hard, when it's not going well, then there's lots of distractions. So when big learning, particularly for the larger organization, is make sure that you can manage and control those. Having the best people on it, to the earlier points about success, is key, because things won't always be going well, and you really need to be able to bust through that. I think for me, one of the biggest learnings in my life is this whole point around keep it small enough to get your arms around it. So in my lifetime, I've gone through where we've implemented IBP within a very small business. Everybody's in the same building. Everybody sees everybody all the time. You can walk around, you can put your arms around it. You can manage the process. Moving up through to where you then start to say, well, actually, no, the supply parts in this country, the demand, well, it's actually these 5 countries over here, and a big influencer on them is this other person in this other country altogether, sort of thing. So the challenge with large organizations, with global implementations, is that you can find yourself trying to put your arms around something so large you can't do it. You can't provide the education, you can't get the alignment, you can't do the coaching because you can't touch the people. You can't sit with them and influence them, you can't coach them, because it's not just the people at the bottom that will need the coaching, it'll be the leadership team as well. So for a global organization, it's not possible to say, well, actually, we're going to pretend to be a country. The point of this, therefore, is as you scope out the implementation, make sure that you either slice it into small slices so that you can manage those ones, or you build capability. You establish local processes as an example, and then grow them into regional or global. So the key message is make sure that you can put your arms around it, because otherwise it will just be another thing on the to-do list for a whole range of people around the world, and you will really struggle to make improvements there. I think we've already said that Excel is not sufficient. As we then start to move, we've gone in, we've inspired, we've got everybody ready. We're going to go through those phases of develop and realization there on Webia. We're going to be appointing the key roles. We're going to be, as part of our design, establishing what the KPIs are that is necessary for our organization. We're going to be making sure that as we look at the model that we have and where we are now, we understand the differences and we understand what will need to change. And clearly, one of the big things that people get stressed about is what's the presentation? What's the information pack? What do I need to prepare? What do I need to bring together for these sessions? So starting to create those initial views, those initial templates, really helps people. It really helps people to engage and what have you. With that design, we're going to move into the realization, the delivery into the organization, that preparation for the first cycle. So here very much, we need to cascade that information. We need to cascade the education. We need to train the managers that, to all the people that's going to be touching the process, and probably some of the ones just beyond those people, because even though they might not be touching the process directly, they're still feeding to the people that do, to the processes that do. So we need to make sure that we get the education out there so everyone understands what we're doing and why we're doing it. We'll need to develop and define those detailed processes and procedures. What is the process around demand? How are we going to manage? What's the rules about managing change? Where are the time fences? Where's the handover points between the execution and IBP? All of those things need to be defined, to be discussed, decided, and defined and written down so they become clear policies for the organization, particularly in a larger organization, again, where what's written down becomes the only real reference point for distant people. Clearly, at this point, we would probably also gone out and establish a system to support the process. So we'd obviously be configuring the systems as well. If I look back at this and look at my lessons learned and what have you, I think one of the things I would highlight is really starting off with get the demand plan ownership right. I think all too often we confuse forecasting with demand planning. It's great that we can establish an analytics center. We can use fantastic maths to create a statistically, this is what the forecast ought to be, this is what the rate trends will be. But the demand plan is very much then that commercial ownership of this is what I'm going to do. A major input to that would have been that statistical forecast, but there's also a number of other factors and other bits. So be clear about who's owning the demand plan in the process. As a hint, whilst a lot of forecasting functions seem to end up in the supply chain is not the commercial function. I've never met a demand planner, a sales forecasting guy in supply chain that ever sold a case. So get the demand plan ownership right. It's a commercial agenda. It's a commercial plan about what we are going to sell. Okay. Design the process top down. Don't just add up what you should do today. So what I could do is I could come along and say, well, I've got a forecasting process in country A, B, C. I've got a supply process. All I need to do is aggregate those up because it's an aggregate planning process, isn't it? The core question is what do we want to talk about in the leadership review, in the management business review? Start top down. What are the families? How do the families interact? And work the process down so that you establish what a process that bubbles up what you want to see, not be sat there trying to find a way to force fit what I do today into this new process, which is a great way of saying we've got a process, but we've not really changed anything. So be clear about the IBP process, be clear about what you want at the top, and then work downward. Now, one of the challenges that we face, I think, and I've got a long history in planning systems as well, is we tend to, employ systems. And the big vendors, SAP, and all the others, and what have you, are coming out with systems to support the process now that basically link everything up at the detail. And so my learning, I guess, it's intuitive, is just because the system can calculate all the detail and just because it can add it up at the speed of light, that doesn't make it a good plan. It doesn't make it a more accurate plan, should I say. We all know, when we talk around forecasting, for instance, we talk about the power of big numbers, the fact that if I come up from SKU to brand or even segment, maybe, then I can forecast more accurately. Well, my question to you then is, when you look at these IBP systems that are all connected at the SKU location, blah, 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 so why do we think that adding up all this detail is actually going to make it more accurate? So there's an old phrase about roughly right or precisely wrong. And I think this is a classic one. So beware the systems trap, because the systems trap will try to take you in the direction of a precisely wrong. I've got a number, I've got a plan that's rolled up. It's complete and comprehensive to 4 decimal places, but it's wrong. Be disciplined in the design. Okay, now this is really tuned, I think, to that global or large organization. Once you start getting many countries, there's lots of agendas, depending on where they're at on the local processes, you can suddenly find that in order to be truly doing the process, somebody says, well, I need 8 weeks, I need 6 or 8 weeks, whatever. Well, where we get to, and in the vast majority of cases, is IBP is a monthly process. Therefore, to make it fit into a month, you need to be really disciplined on the calendar. That's not to say that, as an example, that you say to people, the demand review will always happen on day 5 of week 2, as an example. That is being specific, and it's being very disciplined, but it's actually tying everybody up in knots because there's lots of relationships and lots of ones. So be clear on the calendar. Establish as an example all demand review activities are complete by the end of week 2, example, such that you have clear gates that everybody passes through at the same time, and you can keep the process aligned and coming together. So getting it into the whole month is a real challenge. Got to be really disciplined, in my view. I found it really useful to use a system because to drive structure and discipline. It's not just the effort of adding things up, if you like, or whatever, but it fits with the calendar conversation. By the end of week 2, I've done my demand review, and my final output, the demand review and the demand plan, is in this system and in this format, etc. So it gives people structure. They know what they're feeding. They know what they need to communicate. So we talked about those initial decks to help them understand what they need to prepare. And we're also saying to them, and when you come out of this, this is what you need to provide. This is the format. This is the structure. So the system can be really useful for us in that way. Be careful though. I've seen some where, in effect, the process is overtaken by the system. If we think about what the IBP process is, it's probably, I would turn around and say 70% behaviors, 20% process, and 10% system. Make sure the 10% of the system stays in control and doesn't overtake the people and behaviors. The last section I had on here fundamentally was the sustain. And here we are, we've had our first cycle. We're now into that getting the process go. We've already started. We're now into cycle 2, cycle 3 coming. How do we consolidate the successes we've had? How do we build, continue to develop and mature that capability to enhance the culture, to widen the scope so that it becomes bigger than the small part we could put our arms around and becomes the full organization, in my opinion. And clearly on the technology as well. We will have gone live with something hopefully simple, because we won't know all the answers before we've gone live. We won't know exactly what we want until we've done it and we realize, we need to change. So We've got this whole sustained program. Go live is not the end, it's the beginning. And so as we go into this, we need to be getting ourselves ready and have a strategy to sustain, to develop, continuously improve. I think as I look at it there, for lessons learned, if you like, is one of the big challenges I keep seeing is we confuse tactical and IBP. We confuse that. We talk about the first 3 months being that execution window and IBP being medium to long-term planning. When you've got all the leaders of the business sat in the current month, trying to influence the current month's plan, they're trying to run the business tactically. They've got whole teams underneath them that are paid and employed to run the business tactically. Their role in many ways is to be talking about the strategy of the business, where are we going, to establishing a good plan and make decisions far enough out such that good decisions can be made and we don't have to react in the tactical one, whatever. So be clear on that difference, because otherwise, if we're not clear on the difference, what we'll find is we're always fighting fires in the short term. And really, the embers of those fires were very, very visible 5, 6, 9, 10 months in the future. And we need to make sure that the IBP process is doing those ones, not fighting it when it becomes fires in the short term. So be clear on the difference. And clearly, this is a challenge. People got to be very senior leaders in the business because they're good at solving problems. So when there's fires being lit, it's very appealing to go help solve those problems. Beware the addiction to detail. Now, I think this has got multiple spins on it. First of all, the one we've already talked about to an extent is, I'm going to work out a number. I'm going to add up the, for example, the revenue by SKU, by month, by market, and some, and therefore get to a number. Therefore, this will be my revenue. And we've done all this masses of detail and all the effort that was involved. And maybe we had a system that added it all up at the speed of light, but somebody still had to provide all the information. Somebody had to provide all those costs, etc., all those prices. And we get to the top, and it's probably a wrong number, and it's probably wrong by a predictable amount, because it's always that wrong. Whereas we could have got something that's equally good or possibly even better by working at a higher level, by working at a brand or a segment or an IBP family. So beware the addiction to detail. Now, culturally, some organizations drive that addiction. You will go into the IBP process and people respond to how our leaders ask questions. So if you ask in the IBP process about a detailed question, about a detailed SKU and a detailed month, then guess what? People are quick learners. They will drive towards always being ready, always being prepared to answer any question that they'll be thrown at, because there is a history of detail. So beware the addiction, because it doesn't give us more accuracy. Beware the addiction, because the more that we unnecessarily ask detailed questions, I'm not saying there's never a reason to ask a detailed question, sometimes there are, but a lot of times we're asking a detailed question to show that we know, to show that we're interested, to show that we, and actually think about it and think about what we're asking, because all we're doing is just dragging everybody and the whole process into getting the numbers right, getting the numbers to 3 decimal places, and they're still wrong anyway. I think it's very important, moving on, I think it's very important to talk about ongoing assessments to drive progress. This isn't about keeping a score. It isn't about another KPI so that I can say, yay, I'm green, I scored 81 out of 100. Realistically, we're not going to start everything perfect. We're not going to be able to do everything we wanted to do. Some things we might actually need to develop our capability a bit before we can fully complete it. So we need the assessments as being a continuous reference, a continuous bar that we're looking up to and say, when we started this, This is what we said we wanted to be. I want to, when I'm grown up and when I'm big, I want to be A, B, and C. And we describe that as part of the IBP journey. And what that means is I do this, I do this, I do this. Now, if we don't do the ongoing assessments, if we don't keep reflecting and holding that mirror of what we set out to do and looking at it, then what you'll find is pragmatism starts to come in. Well, we know we said we was going to do that, but actually it's a little bit too difficult. So let's just change that target, that goal, and we'll just bring it down a bit. And what you'll find is it's almost like death by a thousand cuts, because you're continuously being pragmatic, you're continuously being what appears to be being sensible, but we rapidly lose sight of where we were aiming to get to, and the gap that we had there. And there's a positive tension in that gap. It helps us drive improvement, it helps us drive change, maybe. So keep using the assessments, keep thinking to where did I say I was going to get to. Don't bring that bar down to something that we are comfortable with. I love the saying, don't count your chickens too soon. I think the challenge that we have, particularly as we look at the sustain bit, is, we've invested a lot of time and money, we've taken out a lot of our best resources in the business. We've gone live, we've had our first cycle. Let's say we're 3 cycles in, things looking good. Okay, great, move on. People start to get taken off or given alternate roles or double hat and things like this. Maybe it will take time for an IBP process to mature, and the larger the organization, the larger the matrix is, the more difficult it is to keep coaching and driving that maturity and continue to improve it. So don't count your chickens too soon. Really be careful about when that you're ready to move people on, to give them extra roles or whatever. Because if you do it too soon, then you lose sight of what we were trying to achieve, going back to the point about assessments, and very quickly your IBP process will start to step back into an old S&OP supply-demand balance. And that's where it becomes self-fulfilling then when it goes too far. So ultimately, it's all about people and behaviors. Use my references before. 70% is people and behaviors. What do we do? How do we do it? Whatever. 20% process, 10% systems. Make sure that we're continuing to nurture the people, continuing to develop and nurture those behaviors, and everything else will fall into place. So DMI, and I know many people describe it this way as well, we talk about this integrated business excellence model. The organization, what are we trying to do? We're trying to balance that. The people we have, how well educated they are, how they behave in the process. What do we? I don't mean behave as in being good or naughty or whatever. Is how do we interact with people? How do we question? How do we engage? Whatever. Our defined processes. What do we want to do? When does it need to happen? Who's responsible for doing what? Being really clear on accountabilities. You're expected to turn up to this meeting. This is the information, etc., etc., etc. And then the supporting systems. To get it right, we're really trying to hit that sweet spot, that overlap, get the right balance of all three. And clearly, we've seen it many times in the past. We spend millions on the system. We spend a bit of time and a few weeks designing the processes, and the people, we tell them the right things and then think they know it and get on with it. But we've got to really keep working on that sweet spot and make sure that we keep the balance there. So just as a reminder, this was our, as you say, our proven path. So how to manage that transformation project of implementing IBP and what have you. We went through the engage and inspire on that first bit. The develop and the realization, taking us through to that first cycle and getting it going and establishing the process, and then that ongoing sustain. And the challenges, as we've said, is as we start looking at a global or large organization, then some of the dynamics of these become more difficult to put your hands on, more difficult to put your arms around, and therefore need to think about that and how we keep people together. So I'm 45 minutes in, which was perfect to my timing. And what we wanted to do was to open out to some questions, whether you want either speak or type into the chat windows. We had one before the call, but maybe we'll start off with that one and see if it provokes any others. So this was a question from Jeremy, and he was talking about there is as we look at the integration of operational planning and financial planning, how do you accommodate or include the impact of service? So yeah, for instance, if we have a service level of 98%, does that mean that the demand plan should be scaled back by 2%? Well, I think we need to be clear on what our measures are really, and we need to sort of work it through from there. So yeah, is our service measure at 98%? Does that mean that we missed 2% of sales, or does that mean, for instance, 2% of the sales was either delivered out of tolerance, late maybe, or a different product, or there was a substitution that wasn't agreed, and therefore, so I think before we leap into sort of saying what's the service impact on the revenue, we actually need to be clear about what is the way, how we measure in service, and how does it connect to that operational measure, because clearly, what we're trying to do there. As we take that forward then, be clear on what that service measure is getting us towards. Service drives from primarily, I would argue, 3 dimensions. Did we have the product? Was it available? Did we have the so dimension 1, availability. Dimension 2, logistics, operations, warehouse and transportation. Did we have the product, but we damaged the pallet, picked the wrong product, the truck was late for some reason, it could have broken down or been caught in a traffic jam, etc., etc., etc. Then obviously we've got the order to cash ones where, did the customer order a product that wasn't on the pricing list for that customer? Did we not have all the pricing information set up for that product so that the order didn't process? All sorts of things like that. So we really need to be clear about what the service impact is in order that we can then relate it into the process. I think, and staying on the question there, Jeremy, the key bit for me here is this whole point about not adding up the detail is, from a revenue perspective, it really is powerful to look at demonstrated performance. So if we look at the demonstrated levels at the family level and look at the demonstrated revenue rates at the family level, to some extent, some of those service impacts have already been taken care of when you're looking at the demonstrated rate. Now, as we improve, as service improves, then obviously that demonstrated rate will adjust with it, and we come on to. So I wouldn't automatically go looking to adjust the financial plan just because all the detail added up to something that was different. I really look carefully at it and encourage you to work at a higher level. Okay, I see another question. What are the pros? And this is from, I think we can all read it, but I'm just checking. This is from Mario. What are the processes meetings can be killed by implementing S&OP IBP? I think when you look at the overall process, what you'll find there is there's lots of sideline before IBP. There's lots of sideline decision-making processes happening. There might be multiple portfolio ones, supply conversations, multiple commercial conversations about what we're going to do and what have you. So this is the purpose of the design, is to map all your existing meetings and start to say, what decisions are we making in those meetings? How do they map into, okay, that decision isn't going to be made in this meeting on the side here. We're now going to make it in the demand review. So there's lots of examples that they're all commercial sales and marketing meetings or supply chain planning meetings or portfolio. And so lots of periphery meetings, Mario. The key bit is to map them in, and you'll identify your meetings in your process there. Question from Paul. Hi, Steve. Is it possible to measure the success of an IBP implementation in order to gain the confidence of senior leadership in investing in the project? Absolutely. I think when you look at the measures and the KPIs, we'll talk about KPIs and critical success factors. So some things that it's very difficult to measure. So you're looking at the success factors. But let's talk about KPIs. We will have IBP KPIs and we will have tactical KPIs. And actually, we need both operating at the same time. So what's an example of that? For IBP, I'm interested in the demand plan error and bias. I'm interested, therefore, about what that was at a family level, let's say 3 months out. So I've got a 3-month lag. So I'm going into my IBP window. How good a demand plan did I have at 3 months away? The quality of my IBP process. I must also, though, have a forecast accuracy measure that's much more executional, because at the 3 months out, I was only interested in volume and revenue at a family aggregate level. Was I going to sell the right amount of this family of widgets, and what was the revenue going to be? And I can be quite good at that. As I come into the execution, I'm now actually saying, no, actually, did I have widget A in this warehouse and widget B in that warehouse? And if they're in the wrong ones, I might have. So I need to have both in order to measure success. The true measure of success at the end of the day is service, because we had an organization that was organized to deliver well. We'll start to see the operational, the tactical measures improve first, but we really need to think about those 3 or 6 month out measures, about how good a plan we're creating and how good we are translating that into reality. Sergio, what are the most used systems to run IBP? Now there's a long question. There's a number of vendors out there. Would be happy to pick up. I think that is a more detailed conversation later, Sergio. And clearly, you've got the steel wedges out there. You've got SAP are bringing in, and I know you mentioned that one there. The SAP one's interesting because the SAP one is it's very easy to fall into the trap of what we were talking about before, that it powerfully adds up the detail. And at some point, we need to get the detail good enough so that we can manage the interim bit. But at some point, we need to create that fire break in there so we can talk about families in the long term idea. So if you want to have a conversation, I'll send you a Gartner report, Sergio, that lists the main ones out there in the market and where they fit. I'm more than happy to share that. Stuart, have we got any advice for ensuring we get the critical stakeholders buy into the IBP process and keeping their interest if the picture doesn't change much month to month? I think, Stuart, this is why it's so important at that early point to Inspire, to get the leadership team really into what is the process and what the challenges that we face and what they will chase. And it's a really powerful way is actually to do a diagnostic of the business. We do a simple, 2, possibly sometimes 3-day exercise, depends on the size of the organization, to really highlight the issues that are facing and bring them back and how it maps in. So I think to get the critical stakeholders buy-in, they really need to understand what it is about how they're working is stopping them being successful, and getting them into the why, to understand that if I do this over here, then I can improve this. And then we can characterize that through those critical success factors. So I've taken my strategy, I've built it through, I've got to, in order, therefore I must get this right and this right. And then keep that front of mind as we go through cycle, using the KPIs, using those critical success factors, using that vision of being clear about what we're trying to achieve, to continually reinforce and build on what have you. If it's not changing, then you've got to come back down to the KPIs and everything else and say, why isn't it changing? If were they all green and fantastic, then well, hey, fantastic, then great. We're probably already getting very good. I suspect the likelihood is there's lots of red flags, and I think one of the things I've seen in the past that probably plays to it is a lot of times these KPIs that we measure in the detail processes, it's almost what I would call like wallpaper. We put them up, we sort of say, oh wow, That's really bad. But then there's no follow-on consequence. There's no follow-on. How do we? And I don't mean consequence as in stick. I mean consequence as in carrot. Okay, we now know where and how we need to improve. Let's make sure that we focus on the improvement, and we'll see it from there. Anyone for anything else? I'm conscious we're 4 minutes away from the end. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. That seemed to be a good stream of questions. No? Well, okay then. So potentially giving you 2 or 3 minutes back. I'd like to thank you for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There's been some great questions there. We'll be sending out an email after this with a link to a recording of this webinar, where you'll also have the slides available as well in PDF format. And Sergio, I'll drop you a note on that question on systems as well beyond that. If there's nothing else, then I thank you very much for your time, and we try to hold these webinars once a month, once every other month, and would look forward to talking to you again at another one in the future. Thank you very much. Goodbye.